People ask many questions about the behavior of the Allies as the Nazi genocide was taking place. Did the Allies abandon the Jews? Did they know about the murder of millions and simply look the other way? It is easy to blame them. After all, the Allies knew about the camps. They overflew the railroad lines but did not bomb them. Why was no rescue effort even attempted? Some despairing voices still echo from those days.
My name is Shmuel Ziegelbaum, a member of the Polish Bund. When the Nazis occupied Warsaw in 1939, they demanded 12 hostages from the population to prevent further resistance. I volunteered to be one of them. On my release, I ultimately escaped to Belgium, then France, then the United States, and finally London. I spoke on BBC radio concerning the fate of the Jews of Poland, declaring, "It will actually be a shame to go on living if steps are not taken to halt the greatest crime in human history."
Obviously, there remain serious questions. When did the Allies know? Did we have the capability of rescuing the victims? Were the Allied governments, including the U.S. government, anti-Semitic? Are we guilty for what we failed to do? Scholars, of course, look for evidence. We have, for example, the records book of the OSS, the forerunner of the CIA. It reveals no sympathy toward the Jewish people, but no animosity either. The American intelligence community concluded that Jews are the most talented people on earth, that the anti-Semitic tractate called the Protocols of the Elders of Zion was a fabrication, but that Jewish immigration to the United States should nonetheless be restricted.
The British government is another example. An argument can be made that Britain did nothing, not because the government was anti-Semitic, but because it was afraid of certain elements among the British population that wanted to turn England fascist. There was the Fabian Society, a progressive association of writers and thinkers, including George Bernard Shaw and H.G. Wells. They were sympathetic to the concept of eugenics, wanting to determine the course of future human evolution, and even to the Nazis. George Bernard Shaw actually stated that Nazism is an understandable reaction to Judaism. Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain was personally worried about the masses, not to let them get out of control, as in Germany. The government knew that if World War II were presented as a campaign to rescue the Jews of Europe, the anti-Semitic and anti-democratic forces at home might make the war very difficult to win. That is because victory in any war requires consensus on the part of its home population. It doesn't make the British government anti-Semitic simply because it recognized the ugly forces at home that it was dealing with. Still, the results for the Jews were catastrophic.
In May 1939, Britain succumbed to Arab pressure, stemming from the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, Hajj Amin al-Husseini, who was a personal ally of Hitler. Consequently, Britain approved the Malcolm MacDonald White Paper, almost shutting off Palestine to Jewish immigration. With the outbreak of World War II in September, Britain completely closed its doors to Jewish immigration.
Back in America, there were similar concerns that rescue actions on behalf of the Jews might inflame anti-Semitism in the heartland and damage consensus for the war effort. In June 1944, the Jewish Agency in America demanded that Auschwitz and the railroad lines leading to it be bombed. But since January of that year, the policy of the combined Chiefs of Staff in Washington had been to concentrate on military targets only. Auschwitz was considered civilian, and America rejected the proposal.
A parallel demand was made of the British by the Jewish Agency for Palestine. American planes were already bombing Germany, and targets near Auschwitz had already been hit. I personally favored bombing Auschwitz and the railroad lines, but my demands that the bombings be executed were sabotaged by the Foreign Office and the Air Ministry. Does that make me or my government anti-Semitic? Concerning the concentration camps, I later wrote to the Foreign Secretary on July 11, 1944, stating this: all concerned in this crime who may fall into our hands, including the people who only obeyed orders by carrying out these butcheries, should be put to death.
That may sound fine after Germany's defeat, but as long as the war was going on, the Jews were in a complete trap from all sides. They were caught between Hitler on the one hand and the Allies on the other. We might think that the harder the Western powers fought Hitler, the better it would be for the Jews of Europe. But if the Allies had actually taken rescue action on behalf of the Jews, it would have worked against the very Jews they were trying to save. That's because Hitler saw the Jews as responsible for all Allied action against Germany. As far as he was concerned, the Jews were directing an international conspiracy. The Allies were in their pocket.
Did we European Jews in the 1930s want the Western powers to go to war with Hitler? We knew that if they did, we would certainly get the blame and even more persecution. Ironically, the final solution can even be seen as the result of Anglo-American cooperation. For example, the Lend-Lease Act, by which the United States basically donated to England enormous amounts of military equipment, was seen by Hitler as part of a Jewish conspiracy and provoked him to ramp up his persecution of us Jews all the more. But in reality, we Jews had little or no influence on the American or British governments, even though I tried my best. The attitude of the Allies was that we Jews have no value as hostages. They would never bargain with Hitler over our fate. That also helps explain why the German proposal of the Madagascar Plan never had a chance. The Allies would stand resolute against Hitler no matter what he did or did not do to us Jews.
Then take the case of the Soviet Union. Prior to the war, Stalin feared that the large number of Jews living in the Western territories, formerly the Pale of Settlement, might tempt Hitler to invade, since he hated them so much. So Stalin decided to move them further to the east. In so doing, Stalin inadvertently rescued many Jews from Hitler's grasp when he finally did invade. But that didn't make him pro-Jewish. By the same token, we have to be careful about calling the Allies anti-Semitic for failing to rescue the Jews. We see then that the behavior of the Allies had nothing at all to do with the Jews, one way or the other. And if the Allies wanted to stop the genocide, the best way was to defeat Germany. My friend Mr. Churchill summed up the attitude.
We shall go on to the end. We shall fight in France. We shall fight on the seas and oceans. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender. And if, which I do not for a moment believe, this island or a large part of it were subjugated and starving, then our empire beyond the seas, armed and guarded by the British fleet, would carry on the struggle until, in God's good time, the new world with all its power and might steps forth to the rescue and the liberation of the old.
In the larger scheme of things, rescue action was deemed to be only a distraction as far as the Allies were concerned. Even when it came to the Evian Conference and the Bermuda Conference on refugees, there would be no serious attention to us Jews, only that the war must be won.
We must also ask, how much difference would rescue action really have made? After the war, Hitler's architect and Minister of Armaments, Albert Speer, testified that it would have been almost impossible to hit the railroad lines leading to Auschwitz. He declared that the damage could easily have been repaired by a few Polish workers. He declared that Hitler was so intent on genocide that even without death camps, he would have ordered the immediate shooting of Jews. In the end, the Allies did indeed bomb the railroad lines in northern France, but the outcome was questionable.
Another example of Allied refusal to negotiate with the Nazis relates to a deal proposed to save Hungarian Jews. If the Allies would deliver 10,000 trucks to the Germans, they would spare 1 million Jews. The trucks would, of course, be used on the Eastern Front against Stalin, and that would drive a wedge between the Allies. So the plan was dropped. In the final analysis, the Germans understood the Allies in Jewish terms. Everything was a Jewish conspiracy. The Allies acted in an unconnected fashion.
The Allies certainly didn't invent anti-Semitism. What we did do was to make decisions within the constraints of political realities. Our main objective was to win the war, and the rescue of the Jews might only damage our domestic consensus.
Even when it was all over, the Allies were careful that it not sound as though it had been a Jewish war. At the Nuremberg trials, many Jewish lawyers who would have loved to serve for the prosecution were put aside by Chief Prosecutor Robert Jackson, and the charges against the Nazis might have been framed as genocide against the Jewish people and other minorities. But instead, the issue was blurred into the more nebulous charge of crimes against humanity.
As a tragic footnote, we should recall that on May 11, 1943, Shmuel, having fled the Nazis, killed himself as a protest against the indifference and inaction of the Allied governments, leaving behind this letter.
The responsibility for the crime of the murder of the whole Jewish nationality in Poland rests first of all on those who are carrying it out. But indirectly, it falls also upon the whole of humanity, on the peoples of the Allied nations and on their governments, who up to this day have not taken any real steps to halt this crime. By looking on passively upon this murder of defenseless millions of tortured children, women, and men, they have become partners to the responsibility. I cannot continue to live and to be silent while the remnants of Polish Jewry, whose representative I am, are being murdered. My comrades in the Warsaw Ghetto fell with arms in their hands in the last heroic battle. I was not permitted to fall like them, together with them, but I belong with them to their mass grave. By my death, I wish to give expression to my most profound protest against the inaction in which the world watches and permits the destruction of the Jewish people.
Yet another lesson emerged from the ashes. Don't expect the nations of the world to look after the Jewish people. In the final analysis, the Jewish people must look after themselves.